quarter 3 GDP growth rate is at 4.4%, exactly in line with what the RBI had forecasted. Now, let's also tell you how this compares with the previous few quarters and how this compares with what we saw last year as well. The 4.4 GDP growth rate that is for the quarter 3 of financial year 2023, that is lower than the GDP growth rate that we saw in quarter 2. Quarter 2 GDP growth rate was at 6.3%, and this quarter 3 GDP growth rate is at 4.4%. So it has slowed from that quarter. In fact, the GDP growth rate has slowed for the second straight quarter. It slowed in quarter 2 as well, and now it has slowed down again. If you also compare it with how it was last year, this time around, it is lower than 5.4% that was recorded in quarter 3 financial year 2022, and now in quarter 3 financial year 2023, the GDP growth rate is at 4.4% according to the figures that have been released by the government. Now, the second advanced estimates of the GDP growth for the entire year, for the financial year 2023, that has also been released by the government, and that has put the figure at 6.6%. This is the second advanced estimate, so it essentially tells you what is the estimate for the GDP to grow for the current financial year, and that figure has been put at 6.6% compared to 8.8% in financial year 2022. So this is the big breaking news that we're getting at this point. And let's also tell you something about the various categories of the GDP. Well, manufacturing sector is the sector that had witnessed a fall in the gross value added last quarter, and that was in fact a pain point. And this time this was being expected. The GDP growth rate was expected to slow down because, of course, there was high inflation across countries and in India as well. There were interest rate hikes that were announced as well, and those were expected to hurt demand in the economy, bring down consumption in the economy, because, of course, high prices and high interest rates hurt growth by bringing down consumption. Let me go across to our guest joining us on the broadcast, Santosh Mehrotra, senior economist, now joining us to decode what these numbers actually mean. And Professor Mehrotra, 4.4%, exactly what the RBI had forecast. So it doesn't really come as a surprise, but what are the reasons, according to you, for the GDP growth rate slowing for the last 2 quarters?
The fundamental reason is we have to look for that in the severe contraction of 6.6% in FY21, meaning 2021, during the COVID lockdowns, which was unnecessarily national and unnecessarily strict and severe.
Right.
So when the Indian economy contracted by 6.6%, the global economy had contracted by only 3.1%. So obviously from a contraction, you got a real rebound in FY22. You came up to 8.1% growth. And to some extent, the rebound has continued, and we are seeing 6.6%, as you've just told us, in the second revised estimate. So which is obviously lower than the previous year of FY22.
Right.
In other words, what we are seeing is essentially first a rebound and from the very low base of FY21, and that rebound has somewhat continued, but now as you've rightly pointed out, the RBI prediction for the third quarter has come down significantly from the second quarter, significantly compared to the first quarter of FY23. And this is exactly what we anticipated, that the rebound has run out of steam, that the growth rate has run out of steam. So what our expectation when we get revised rates in the third provisional estimates as for 23, we'll see lower. And moving forward, it's very highly likely that in FY24, meaning in the current financial year, which is about to start on the 1st of April to March next year, it will be a growth rate which is lower than the 6.6 that we are likely to experience in FY23. This is because there is no real serious recovery. So I think really the lesson for the government is, please stop patting ourselves on the back about the fact that we are the fastest growing large economy. We are the fastest growing large economy for no reason other than the fact that we are among the poorest, we have to grow fast. And secondly, we had contracted very, very severely in the COVID period. And that rebound has run out of steam. That's foundationally where we are.
Right. And Professor Mehrotra, if I'm also looking at the sectors here, manufacturing, the gross value added for the manufacturing sector was 64,594 crores in quarter two. I beg your pardon, it was 6.29 lakh crore in quarter two, while it has now come down to 6.14 lakh crore in quarter three. So even last quarter, we saw that it was the manufacturing sector that was dragging the GDP growth rate down, and now it has fallen for the second straight quarter. So manufacturing sector really emerging as a pain point for the economy at large.
Absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. The fact of the matter is that because there was a rebound in FY22, manufacturing had grown at 9.9%. And in FY23, manufacturing overall has grown only by 1.6%. And you are seeing a continuation of that pain in the quarterly estimates that you've just pointed out. The bottom line is, regardless of all the talk about performance-linked incentive scheme having a major impact, in the last 5 years, manufacturing contribution to GDP had systematically fallen from the rate that this government had inherited, which is its contribution was 17%, it came down to 15%, it came down to 14%, it even came down to 13% contribution, and a manufacturing employment absolute level decline, not just a manufacturing employment share decline, but absolute employment decline in manufacturing. And this is what is continuing. So we need to stop patting ourselves on the back that we are going brilliantly with the PLI scheme. The fact of the matter is that the unorganized sector and the MSMEs, which have been suffering from the demonetization, that suffering has continued. And until we take serious note of this and policy action is directed at the MSMEs in particular and the unorganized sector in general, do not expect jobs growth to rise.
Right.
Because job growth, when it doesn't rise, final consumption expenditure does not rise. Right. And all we've seen is the per capita in consumption expenditure at levels just above the 1920 level. Obviously, they will not rise unless if joblessness is as high as it is. But the government's not even willing to recognize that joblessness is a problem. We are constantly being told by ministers, if they go to the World Economic Forum, that organized sector jobs are growing in this sector, in this subsector, and that subsector.